So one of my friends at work asked me if I was able to build him a fire pit, as he was unable to buy one at the moment, I guess because they're all in demand because of everyone on lockdown. And I said that I wasn't able to cast one out of metal or press one out of sheet metal or even spin one like a bowl, which is how some of them are made. But I would be able to have a go at making a segmented one. So this formula is how to calculate the dimensions of a 16-sided dome. And I actually ended up only using 3 segments high instead of 4 because I wanted the fire pit to be a little bit shallower, resulting in 48 sides, which is half of a irregular enneacontohexahedron. Now once I'd calculated all the dimensions, and this was based on an 80cm wide fire pit, I was able to make a flat net which I could then print out of card to make sure I had everything right. And this also gave me an opportunity to make some changes here, because I thought a flat bottom would actually be better than having this segmented bottom in order to enable easier cleaning and things like that. So I printed out one each of the segments at real size, but unfortunately the base plate was actually too big to print out on one sheet. So I just printed half out, and that meant I could fold it over and just mirror the template. Going through this process kind of gave me flashbacks to the suit of armour build, but it was really helpful because now it means I know how to template things out of paper, make them first out of card to make sure I've got everything right, and then invest in the expensive materials and the difficult materials like metal. So in order to make the bowl, I wanted 16 of each piece, and I just made that by stacking up the card into little piles and then cutting several at once. It made life a lot easier. As mentioned from the original sketch, I changed it from 4 segments deep to 3 segments deep, and that's just because the fire pit was getting too deep and the walls were too steep, and I just thought as you sat round it, it would be a lot nicer if it was a little bit shallower so you could actually see the fire. That's one of the great things about making the templates first out of card. It means you can kind of adjust it as you go and not make any expensive mistakes. Another helpful thing I learned while making the template was the order of operations, so how to attach each piece to each other. This way made sense to me, but as I was doing it, it actually became more complicated, so it really helped me when it came to metal and the order in which I attach each of the pieces. And then once all the pieces are connected to the main base plate, it's just a case of folding them all up, and then this flat object suddenly starts to come to life as this volumetric shape, and it's really, really cool, and you start to get an idea of the full size of this fire pit. Wait for it. So there's that. And then I wanted to just see how high up the fire pit was going to be lifted by making some mock-up legs out of card as well. Now to fit with the aesthetic of the build, I didn't want these to be too ornate, but I did want to give them a little bit of curve for strength, but also to add that kind of much more handmade feel. And then a couple of handles on either side, again just to get an idea of how big they need to be in order to get your hand in and things like that. So once I'd finished this mock-up, I actually sent photos to my friend just to make sure that we're on the right tracks, and he got a sense of scale and the kind of the aesthetic of the build, and he was all on board, so I could then start actually using it to make a jig in order to hold the metal. And I could just use the card mock-up in order to get the right angles, and then just build up this jig bit by bit using the card template as support. And then hopefully that could then be fixed securely in order to hold the heavy weight of the metal. As I started to secure it, I thought it'd be a good idea to just make the jig actually just a little bit shallower, and that would mean that it wouldn't be a perfect match to the card mock-up, but it would mean that I could bend the metal into place and give me a little bit of breathing room and leeway when I start to weld it up. And just check for level and then screw in all the joints to make sure it was solid. Now I knew I was going to have to be cutting a lot of straight edge sheet metal, which would be great if I had something like a metal bandsaw, but I'm a grinder kind of guy, so I just wanted to build a quick jig that would help me make perpendicular and straight cuts. Initially I thought the cuts would be beveled to help with the 3D shape, but you actually want to leave a gap that you can fill with the weld later. Tight. Now I wanted this to be secure enough that it didn't fly off and kill me, but also not too secure that it got annoying every time I needed to change a disc. Now let's get to the fun part and cut some metal. So I'm just going to zoom in here on this sheet of metal so I've got a bit more room to play with. Then we can start laying out the templates, which I've made out of wood from the original paper templates. And then these can just tessellate and fit together on the sheet. It would have been easier to have them joined together, but then I would have been able to fit less on a sheet, so this was more economic, if not more time consuming. I was super happy with the grinder jig. It just made me think I wish I'd have made it a lot earlier. Did leave some pretty gnarly edges, but that's no problem, we'll just clean those up with a file later. Bruce, this is taking too long. No, that's a terrible idea. So once all the side pieces were cut out, then it's just the base plate, and that could be the first piece we use to start welding up. Before any of that fun stuff, we just need to clean up and deburr all these edges. As I said when we made the wooden jig, we just made it a little bit shallower than the finished shape, and that means that we can close it up later as we go. And also I'm just going to tack weld each of these pieces in place, so if I need to adjust anything, it's easy to just knock it off and re-tack it instead of welding the whole seam each time. And now we can just play guess the welder setting game, where it doesn't matter what setting I'm putting it on, it's never right for what I'm doing. Now I wasn't really sure the order in which to do this, but I just thought if I rotated the piece 90 degrees each time, it would mean at least it's balanced as I go and add more and more weight. So you see here what I mean about leaving some space. So it's tight at the bottom where it touches the base plate, but it opens out like petals as you get further to the top, and then I can adjust as I go. So once it was all tacked on the inside, I could then flip it over and fully weld each of the seams on the outside. Sorry Bruce, I need this more than you do. Now before I start lining up the handles and putting the legs on, I just wanted to make sure that the top was actually flat and flush, so when I flip it over, it doesn't wobble. And I also ended drilling some drainage holes in the bottom plate in case any water gets in, and also some air holes in the bottom side plates for ventilation for the fire. This little angle finder was super useful, just offer up and just get the correct angle straight away. Now my friend requested that the build actually be quite rustic looking, so although I didn't want to kind of have it too polished, I just wanted to make sure that I took off any rough edges. And now I can use the card template as a basis for the metal legs. I'm just using some slightly thicker 6mm stock here for the legs, just so they've got a bit more support. The rest of the build is 5mm sheet. To the forge we go! Now, as little as I know about blacksmithing, I do know this. Forging outside in direct sunlight makes it really hard to see what temperature the metal is. So I just want to get the basic curve right for the bottom of the feet, and then duplicate that across the 3 legs. And then once the rough shape is right, I could refine it and make them all even. So they've just got a curve at the bottom and then a sort of an angle at the top that meets the correct angle of the fire pit. Just want to clean up the areas where they're going to be welded, because I want to make sure there's a really strong weld and connection here. Now with the legs attached, that's the main part of the fire pit finished. I just want to make sure I've ground off any rough edges and clean up any of those welds as well. Again, don't want to make this look too neat and tidy, and also he said that he wants to leave it outside to develop some rust patina over time, and as you heat it and burn fires in it, this metal is going to go some beautiful colours as well. One thing that wasn't a request but I did want to do was make a grill for the fire at the bottom. I know you can just set fires straight in the bottom of these, but to lift it off you get a bit better airflow and also make cleaning out at the end a bit easier as well. Just knocked up this jig out of wood first, but that was a really bad idea because after a couple of welds it was just burning holes in it, so I switched over to some metal plate after that. Welding up this ring was really satisfying, I don't know why, but because I've got the metal jig there, it meant that all the pieces were flat and the angles were right, and it was just really satisfying when it came together as a big 16-sided ring. And I thought some bars, say an inch apart, would be perfect for this kind of fireplace. I'm just pasting some intermediate ones, and I'll put one in between each as well. So it is a nice fit and it's the right height, but I did end up welding some tabs in just to stop it sliding around and potentially tipping over. Now something else as this project developed that I decided I wanted to make, which wasn't part of the initial request, was a wooden tabletop. And this just meant it could be used as something else when not being used as a fire pit, and also in winter it didn't get full of like dead leaves and stuff. So this is just a really simple, nice and chunky 2x4 tabletop, and I'm just planing the edges just to make the connections a bit better for the glue. And these cross braces not only help secure the tabletop, but it also means that you can align it better when you're placing it on top of the fire pit. That, and I've only got one long clamp, so I had to clamp one end, screw it, and then move the clamp along and screw as I go. But it worked, and it's a really nice joint in the end. I'm just removing the temporary sort of hold downs, because I only had one clamp. Just use the big circular saw just to bring this down to a manageable size, and then I can actually cut out the right shape for the pit itself. So I just roughly drew round, but then I realised that I probably added like a 5mm lip just as an overlap. And then a smaller battery circular saw was super helpful just to knock off each of these sides. Again, no fine woodwork in here, but I just wanted to make sure that the top surface was at least level and knock off any sharp edges with a bit of sanding.
Does it come in black?
So I used this technique when I made the bed at Laura's in the summer last year, and I really like the effect it has on pine, especially going from that super white coloured wood down to something really deep and black. And then also after one pass. So if you just knock off the initial rough surface and then go back with the second pass, it makes a really tough finish, and also it kind of brings out a real shine as well, a much deeper, darker colour, as you can see by the state of my hands. And I just applied one thin coat of outdoor finish. It was more to seal the charred effect in than sealing any of the elements out. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to make was a fire poker. As much as I love digging my hands into red hot coals, I'm pretty sure my friend doesn't want to do that, so I thought it'd be helpful to have something to stab around in the flames. So back into the forge, and this will just be a quick one. We've just got that single bit of bar, but we want to try and forge weld the bar back onto itself. In that way you get the nice spike that you can have on the end of a fire poker. So firstly, just bring the round bar into square, and that means that we can fold it back on itself and have two flat surfaces. And also the bit that you're folding back on itself is going to be the spike that points backwards, so it's worth bringing that spike down to a taper now. Now this is the first time I've done anything like this. My only experience is seeing Brett make a few of his fish hooks, so I had no idea how much material to actually leave and to fold over, but it turned out okay. And just in order to make the welding process a little bit easier, just have a bit of borax to use as flux. So we've got the fire nice and hot for this one, and you just want to heat the metal till it just starts to spark, and then that's at welding temperature. The initial weld right at the end took, but as I started to forge it out, it started to split a little bit further back, so I ended up welding it a second time. You can see there's a little gap there in the V. And then once it's all forged out, just a bit of fine tuning to get all the pointy bits pointing in the right direction. And as you can see, the round bar was actually just a little bit too smooth, so what I ended up doing was heating and texturing the whole bar, the whole length of the poker, which actually turned out really nice. And again, just give it a really rough grind just to bring out some of the texture, but leave some of that really sort of raw forged effect, which looks super nice. It's just a really simple piece of wood. I think this is actually something that I turned at Yandles when Dandles taught us all how to use a lathe, which was really fun. So that was the first thing I turned. And I just want to set the poker into the handle with some epoxy. I did consider actually forging this end out into like a spike and using the hot metal to burn into the wood, but at this point it was the middle of the night and I think my neighbours were getting a little pissed off. So although this is a build for someone else, I couldn't resist not having a fire in it. Let's just say I was testing it out. And just remember, as always, no matter what you guys are making, remember to always stay hydrated. Prost.